At 2:13 on a rain-heavy Friday morning, Emily Carter watched a stranger tear his signature from a contract worth millions, then slide the unsigned pages toward a man whose face had gone completely white. The gesture itself was quiet, almost polite, yet every conversation inside the downtown Chicago lounge stopped as though someone had cut the power. The stranger did not raise his voice, threaten anyone, or even look angry. He simply said, "If your numbers require people to disappear, then your numbers are wrong." The man across from him gathered the papers with trembling hands, but one loose page slipped beneath Emily's booth before he hurried toward the locked front door. She should have called after him, yet the sentence printed across the top froze her in place. Mercer Street redevelopment, final displacement schedule. Beneath it appeared the address of the apartment building where her mother had lived for 28 years, along with a demolition date only 6 weeks away. Emily folded the page before anyone noticed, although guilt moved through her almost immediately, because she had never been comfortable keeping what did not belong to her. She had come to the lounge for the same reason she came every Friday, to spend 1 hour in a room where nobody expected a polished answer, a clever campaign, or a reassuring smile. During the week, she worked as a senior designer at a national advertising agency, where every human problem eventually became a slogan, a color palette, or a presentation prepared for clients who preferred optimism to truth. Her mother's building, however, could not be reduced to a concept board, because its hallways held decades of birthdays, unpaid favors, borrowed groceries, and ordinary lives nobody photographed. When Emily looked across the room again, the stranger in the charcoal suit had already closed his leather portfolio, leaving a cup of black coffee untouched beside his hand. His eyes met hers for one brief second, and she felt the unsettling certainty that he had noticed both the fallen page and the decision she had made. The bartender locked the entrance after the nervous man left, then moved through the room collecting empty glasses beneath the amber lights. Emily slid the document into her canvas bag, telling herself she only wanted time to understand it before returning it, but the explanation sounded dishonest even inside her own mind. The stranger remained at table 7, watching rain travel down the tall windows while the rest of the lounge slowly emptied around him. He carried authority without performing it, which made him more difficult to read than men who announce their importance through expensive watches and impatient voices. When the bartender approached him with the final bill, the stranger nodded toward Emily's untouched bourbon and asked for a glass of water to be placed beside it. He did not approach her, introduce himself, or mention the paper, but before leaving, he paused near her booth and said, "Some information becomes dangerous only after the wrong person realizes you have it." Emily looked up sharply, yet he continued toward the door without waiting for a response, leaving the warning suspended between them. "Who is he?" she asked the bartender after the stranger disappeared into the rain. The bartender dried one glass slowly before answering, as though the truth required caution. "Dominic Vale," he said, lowering his voice. "He owns Vale Urban Partners, the company trying to buy half the river district, although lately he has been refusing deals his own board already approved." Emily's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag because the company name appeared at the bottom of the displacement schedule. "Why would he warn me?" she asked, and the bartender gave her a look that suggested she had already answered her own question. Maybe because he knows that page was not supposed to fall where an honest person could find it. By sunrise, Emily had read the document 3 times at her kitchen table, and each reading uncovered another detail she wished she had missed. The plan described Mercer Street as economically obsolete, structurally inefficient, and suitable for immediate vacancy, yet nowhere did it mention the 93 residents still living inside the building. A handwritten note in the margin instructed someone named Calder to accelerate code pressure before public notice, language that sounded less like redevelopment than manufactured neglect. Emily photographed every page, sealed the original inside an envelope, and called her mother before she could lose her nerve. She did not explain everything, only asked whether inspectors had visited recently, and the silence on the other end lasted long enough to become an answer. Her mother finally admitted that the heat had failed twice, The elevators were being cited almost weekly, and management had begun offering cash to anyone willing to leave before October, without explaining what would follow. When Emily ended the call, another message appeared on her phone from an unknown number. Return the page to Table 7 next Friday, and do not trust anyone who arrives before me. Emily spent the week deciding whether the message had come from Dominic or from someone who wanted her to believe it had. She searched public records during lunch breaks, learning that Vale Urban Partners had purchased 3 surrounding blocks through shell companies, while Mercer Street remained the final property between the firm and a waterfront development valued near $900 million. Every article described Dominic as disciplined and private, yet none mentioned disputes inside his company or a reason he would sabotage his own expansion. More troubling was the name Calder, which appeared beside municipal consulting firms connected to emergency closures across Chicago. By Thursday, after 3 sleepless nights and several unanswered calls, Emily understood that the fallen page was not merely evidence of one building being targeted. It was a map showing how residents could be pressured out before anyone publicly announced the danger. At 1:58 Friday morning, Emily entered the lounge early and immediately regretted it because a man she had never seen was already sitting at Table 7. He wore a navy overcoat over a gray suit, and although he smiled when she looked toward him, nothing in the expression reached his eyes. "Ms. Carter," he said, as if they had an appointment. Emily remained beside the bar, keeping her canvas bag against her hip, while the bartender quietly set down her usual bourbon and water. The man introduced himself as Julian Calder, special counsel for Vale Urban Partners, then explained that an internal document had been misplaced during a confidential meeting. Returning company property now would prevent an innocent misunderstanding from becoming a legal problem, he said. Emily asked how he knew her name, and Calder smiled before mentioning the building where her mother lived. The answer struck hard, yet she kept her expression steady, because fear was the reaction he had come to collect. "You are asking me to return something you have not described," she said, forcing him to reveal knowledge or retreat. Calder leaned closer and replied, "I am asking you not to confuse private development strategy with a public cause, especially when your family's housing situation could become more complicated." Before Emily could answer, the front door opened behind him, carrying in a gust of rain and Dominic Vale. Dominic crossed the lounge without haste, but Calder stood before he reached the table, which told Emily more than any introduction could have. "You were instructed not to contact her," Dominic said, removing his wet coat. Calder claimed he was protecting the company, though confidence had drained from his tone. Dominic looked toward Emily with restrained concern. "Did he threaten your mother?" he asked. Emily answered honestly, and the stillness that followed was colder than anger. Dominic turned back to Calder and said, "You have until 9 to resign, surrender every project file, and preserve your communications for outside counsel." Calder reminded Dominic that the board would never support an investigation endangering the River District deal. Dominic answered that the board would have to choose once residents learned how code violations had been manufactured to lower property values. Calder's gaze shifted toward Emily's bag, confirming the page mattered more than he admitted. "That document proves nothing by itself," he said. Emily took out the envelope but placed it between them, instead of surrendering it. "Then why did you arrive before him?" she asked. For the first time, Calder had no prepared answer. After Calder left, Dominic asked the bartender to lock the door again. Emily expected gratitude or another warning, yet he began with an apology, because her family had been pulled into a conflict she never chose. He explained that the original redevelopment plan included protected leases, relocation funding, and a community ownership option, but someone inside his company had replaced those provisions with an accelerated vacancy strategy. He discovered the substitution only hours before the meeting Emily witnessed, and because several board members benefited, he could not trust his legal department. "Why not go to the police?" Emily asked. Dominic looked toward the untouched coffee and answered, "Because the deputy commissioner signing emergency closures is Calder's brother-in-law." Emily returned the original page but kept the photographs, a decision Dominic accepted without hesitation. He offered to move her mother somewhere safe, and Emily refused because protection that saved one resident while abandoning 92 others was merely a polite surrender. Together, they agreed that Emily would document conditions and resident testimony, while Dominic traced financial approvals without alerting the board. Before they separated, he wrote a number on a business card and told her to call only if someone contacted her family again. Emily noticed the coffee cooling beside him. "You order it every week," she said. Dominic's expression changed. "Some promises are easier to keep when nobody knows what they mean," he replied. The first inspection arrived Monday morning, 2 weeks earlier than required, and the city cited Mercer Street for electrical hazards residents had reported repeatedly, without response. Emily's mother called from the lobby, while officials photographed cracked walls and posted a notice warning that partial evacuation might become necessary. The timing proved Calder had not resigned quietly, even though Vale Urban Partners announced his departure as a personal decision. Emily left work before noon and reached the building with her sketchbook, phone, and a growing certainty that evidence mattered only if someone organized it before fear scattered everyone. She began recording names, dates, repair requests, and photographs, while Dominic sent an independent engineer who discovered several hazards had resulted from maintenance orders deliberately canceled months earlier. By evening, residents gathered inside the basement laundry room because management refused to open the community hall. Some wanted to accept cash offers before the building became unlivable, while others accused Dominic's company of creating the crisis and saw no reason to trust him. Emily did not defend him, because trust could not be requested as payment for incomplete honesty. Instead, she placed the displacement schedule on a folding table and explained what she knew, including Dominic's role and his claim that resident protections had been removed without authorization. Her mother listened from the second row, visibly hurt that Emily had hidden the danger. Afterward, she said, "You were trying to protect me from fear, but you also protected me from the truth." The words followed Emily back to the lounge Friday, where Dominic waited at table 7 with 2 folders and the same untouched coffee. She told him that secrecy had already cost her mother trust, and if he expected residents to stand beside him, he needed to stop deciding which truths they could handle. Dominic accepted the criticism, then opened the first folder containing payment records linked to Calder, 2 board members, and a property contractor. The second held something worse, a signed authorization bearing Dominic's digital signature, approving the canceled repairs 6 months earlier. He insisted he had never seen it, but the authentication system showed it originated from his executive account. "If the board sees this first, they will say I approved everything and changed my story only after the page vanished," he said. Emily examined the authorization as a designer accustomed to spotting inconsistencies others missed. The signature appeared accurate, but the footer used a corporate typeface discontinued the previous winter, 3 months before the document's listed date. She explained that whoever created the file had copied an older template, meaning the digital record could have been forged after someone accessed Dominic's archives. The discovery did not clear him, but it created a path toward proving intent. Dominic looked at her with relief and admiration, then asked how quickly she could compare the full archive. "Fast enough to make whoever did this nervous," she answered. Their progress lasted less than a day before Emily's agency placed her on administrative leave. A senior partner explained that Vale Urban Partners was a major prospective client, and anonymous evidence suggested Emily had stolen confidential material while pursuing a personal grievance. She understood immediately that Calder had widened the pressure from her mother's home to her livelihood. The partner advised silence until review, but his rehearsed sympathy revealed the outcome had already been negotiated. Emily cleared her desk beneath the watchful quiet of colleagues, too frightened to ask questions. Outside, she called Dominic, then hung up before the first ring ended because she refused to let dependence become the price of his help. Instead, Emily went to the art supply store, listed on the receipt, once hidden in her sketchbook. The owner, Mrs. Alvarez, listened while Emily explained enough to request an unused back room. By sunset, it became an evidence center filled with resident statements, inspection reports, emails, and redevelopment presentations obtained through public filings. Her mother arrived carrying sandwiches and an apology neither woman allowed to become dramatic. "I was angry because I was scared," she said. Emily answered, "I hid the truth because I was scared too." And the honesty repaired more than reassurance could have. Dominic appeared after midnight without assistance, carrying a cardboard box of archived contracts. He had learned about Emily's suspension from the board member who ordered it, and his face held controlled fury. Emily refused his offer to pressure the agency, because winning her job back through influence would validate Calder's accusation. She needed truth to restore her name, not Dominic's power. He nodded, placed the box beside her, and said, "Then tell me what work needs doing." For 3 hours, they compared signatures, fonts, timestamps, and approval chains until Emily found a recurring metadata tag inside 4 altered documents. The tag belonged to an outside contractor hired by Calder, but its billing address led somewhere neither expected, a non-profit foundation established in memory of Dominic's mother. Dominic stared at the foundation address long enough for Emily to understand that the discovery had reached beyond corporate betrayal. The nonprofit funded late-night meals, emergency rent assistance, and scholarships for children of service workers, all causes inspired by his mother's years working overnight shifts. Dominic had built it before Vail Urban Partners became nationally known, and he guarded its finances more carefully than any development account. If Calder had used it to route contractor payments, the scheme was designed not only to steal money, but to corrupt the institution Dominic considered morally untouchable. Emily closed the laptop and told him they needed facts before anger became an accusation someone else could exploit. The foundation's executive director, Naomi Price, agreed to meet at dawn inside a 24-hour diner on the south side. She had worked with Dominic for 11 years and reacted to the records with genuine shock, yet shock did not explain why her authorization code appeared on 3 transfers. Naomi admitted Calder had persuaded her to approve an emergency cybersecurity vendor after donor accounts were targeted, but she never knew the vendor also worked on redevelopment files. She then revealed that 6 months earlier, Dominic's younger half-brother Adrian requested temporary access to the Foundation archive for a donor presentation. Adrian served as Vail Urban Partners' chief strategy officer, publicly supported Dominic during every dispute, and was the only person outside his office who knew why the untouched coffee at Table 7 mattered. The possibility of Adrian's involvement hurt because it fit too well. He had championed the River District project, negotiated with Calder, and repeatedly argued that resident protections made the development financially unattractive. Dominic had dismissed those disagreements as ambition, partly because he spent years compensating for their father's open preference for him. Emily recognized guilt disguising itself as trust. "You are not responsible for what he chose, because you benefited from what wounded him," she said, although Dominic looked unconvinced. He agreed to confront Adrian only after they secured evidence that could survive both court and public scrutiny. Their opportunity arrived during a Monday board presentation, when Adrian planned to request final authorization for emergency demolition. Dominic would force a delay upstairs, while Emily and Naomi searched archived access logs from a secure office below. The plan required precision because any visible accusation would allow Adrian to erase records or claim Dominic manufactured the conflict to save his reputation. Emily entered through the loading dock wearing a visitor badge and carrying her sketchbook beneath a plain coat. At 3:17, Naomi found an encrypted export created from Dominic's archived executive files and transferred through Adrian's credentials to Calder's contractor. Upstairs, Adrian moved faster than expected. He presented photographs of Mercer Street's failing systems, testimony from inspectors, and analysis claiming immediate evacuation was the only responsible option. Several board members appeared ready to approve before Dominic asked why repair budgets had been canceled before the most serious violations appeared. Adrian answered that emergency capital had been redirected after Dominic's authorization, then displayed the forged document Emily had identified. Dominic challenged the obsolete template, but Adrian produced a technical report certifying the file as authentic. Someone inside the company had prepared a second layer of defense. Emily sent Dominic the encrypted access record, yet before he could introduce it, security entered the downstairs office with police officers carrying a warrant. Calder had reported unauthorized access to Foundation systems and named Emily as the suspected intruder. Naomi explained that she had granted permission, but the warrant alleged her credentials were compromised. Emily understood resistance would transform a fragile case into a convincing image of guilt, so she handed over the laptop and allowed officers to place her in custody. As they escorted her through the lobby, the elevator opened and Dominic stepped out, his face losing color when he saw the restraints. He moved toward her, but Emily stopped him with a look, because public intervention would support Adrian's claim that she acted on Dominic's behalf. "Finish the meeting," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the humiliation. Dominic obeyed because trusting her judgment mattered more than performing rescue. Back upstairs, he requested a preservation order on every project and Foundation server, then warned directors of personal liability if they authorized demolition while fraud evidence remained unresolved. The board postponed the vote 48 hours. Emily was released before midnight because Naomi's original authorization remained valid, although her devices stayed in evidence. Dominic waited outside the station holding 2 coffees from the diner where they had met Naomi. For the first time, he drank from one. Emily noticed but did not ask, because grief had already begun answering. "Adrian knew about the coffee," he said. "He used my mother's foundation because he wanted the betrayal to feel complete." Emily accepted the second cup while rain darkened the pavement. "Then we do not defeat him by becoming what he expects," she said. "We make the truth impossible to bury." With 48 hours remaining, Emily and Dominic stopped trying to prove every part of the conspiracy and focused on the fact their opponents could not explain. The altered documents had been produced before Mercer Street's official conditions justified emergency action, meaning someone planned the crisis rather than responded to it. Emily reconstructed the timeline from repair cancellations, inspection requests, contractor invoices, and resident complaints, arranging the evidence visually because a pattern people could see would be harder to dismiss than legal argument. Her years in advertising had taught her how images could manipulate attention, but now she used the same skill to restore context instead of hiding it. Dominic contacted outside forensic accountants and granted unrestricted access, even though doing so exposed his failures of oversight. Adrian called after sunrise and asked to meet Dominic alone at table 7. The location was deliberate, turning a place associated with memory into another instrument of control. Dominic agreed, but Emily waited inside the bartender's office with the door partly open, close enough to hear, and far enough that Adrian could speak without performing for an audience. When he arrived, he looked exhausted rather than triumphant, wearing tailored confidence without its usual polish. He sat opposite Dominic, glanced at the untouched coffee, and said, "You always knew how to turn grief into theater." Dominic did not react, which angered Adrian more than denial would have. Adrian admitted rerouting the project because he believed Dominic's protections were sentimental obstacles threatening the company their father built. He insisted the building would eventually be condemned, residents would accept money, and the district would generate enough revenue to justify every uncomfortable decision. Beneath that argument lived something older. Adrian had spent his life watching Dominic receive trust, inheritance, and moral admiration, while he was treated as the ambitious son requiring supervision. "You got to be principled because everyone else absorbed the cost," he said. "I only made the cost visible." Dominic answered that pain could explain a choice without excusing it. Adrian then offered a deal. Dominic would resign, the board would preserve relocation funds, and Emily's agency would restore her position through a confidential settlement. The proposal revealed that Adrian still believed every person could be moved by the correct combination of fear and reward. Dominic looked toward the office door, because the offer deliberately included Emily's future. She stepped into the room and said, "You keep offering people safer cages and calling them choices." Adrian recovered quickly and denied making any criminal admission. Emily agreed, because his explanation alone would not convict him. She placed her visual timeline on the table and pointed to a contractor payment approved at 2:13 on a Friday morning, a time repeated across the forged records. Adrian had used the timestamp as a private insult, believing Dominic would recognize it only after the scheme succeeded. That detail connected his foundation access, Calder's contractor, and the altered files more directly than any signature. Adrian looked at the chart, and for one revealing second his eyes moved toward the exact transfer Emily had marked. The bartender quietly placed an envelope beside Dominic. Inside were security backups from the lounge's private office network, where Adrian once used the guest terminal after meeting Calder. The system captured a cloud sync notification showing the same contractor folder and transfer number weeks before repair cancellations began. The evidence was not miraculous. The bartender mentioned the old terminal only after Emily asked whether Adrian had ever worked there, and backups existed for insurance audits. Adrian understood immediately, but instead of denying everything, he accused Dominic of choosing strangers over family. "No," Dominic replied. "I am choosing the people you decided did not count." By noon, outside counsel delivered the logs, backup, and forensic timeline to federal investigators and the city inspector general. The board suspended Adrian, revoked demolition authority, and placed every district transaction under immediate, fully independent external review. Calder attempted to leave Illinois, but was detained after Naomi provided his vendor communications. Emily's agency offered reinstatement, describing her suspension as a misunderstanding. She declined because the company had defended its client before examining the truth, and returning would require pretending the betrayal had been administrative rather than moral. That evening, residents gathered inside the Mercer Street laundry room, where Dominic stood without a podium and accepted responsibility for failing to detect what happened inside his company. He announced that Vail Urban Partners would transfer the property into a resident-controlled trust, fund every repair, and surrender its development option without confidentiality requirements. Some residents remained angry, which he accepted without asking forgiveness as proof of change. Emily's mother asked whether the promises would survive if Dominic lost control of the company. He handed her the signed trust documents and answered, "That is why they no longer depend on me." The repairs at Mercer Street began 3 weeks later, not with ceremonial photographs, but with electricians replacing dangerous panels before sunrise. Independent engineers supervised the work, residents elected a governing committee, and every expense appeared on a public ledger beside the mailboxes. Dominic remained chief executive after the board's emergency vote, although he surrendered unilateral authority over community acquisitions and appointed an outside ethics director. Adrian faced charges for fraud, obstruction, and misuse of charitable funds, yet Dominic refused requests to describe him as a monster. "He made choices that harmed people," he said during his only statement. Turning him into something inhuman would make it easier to ignore the systems that rewarded those choices. Emily's name was cleared when investigators confirmed documents had been planted to discredit her, but freedom from accusation did not restore the life she had before. She spent weeks questioning whether leaving the agency had been brave or merely irreversible, while unpaid bills accumulated beside requests from residents needing help, presenting their own housing cases. Mrs. Alvarez offered her the back room permanently for modest rent, and Emily transformed it into a small design studio serving community organizations, independent publishers, and public interest campaigns. The work paid less initially, but every project carried the satisfaction of telling the truth without erasing the people inside it. Friday nights changed after the investigation because the lounge no longer felt neutral. Reporters sometimes waited outside hoping to photograph Dominic, while strangers occupied nearby tables and whispered about the scandal. For several weeks, Emily and Dominic avoided Table 7, meeting instead at diners or the Mercer Street courtyard. Their connection deepened through ordinary disagreements rather than perfect understanding. Emily challenged his instinct to solve problems through resources, while Dominic questioned her habit of treating exhaustion as evidence of independence. Neither rescued the other, and neither remained untouched. Nearly a year after the fallen page changed everything, Emily returned to the lounge at 2:13 on a quiet autumn morning. Rain softened the city lights, and the bartender greeted her with bourbon, water, and 2 orange slices beside an empty chair. Dominic had not arrived, although he had asked to meet after the final transfer of Mercer Street ownership. 20 minutes later, the bartender placed a cream envelope on the table. Inside rested the original redevelopment page, stamped void, with a note saying, "Some documents should be remembered for what they failed to become." Dominic entered without a suit jacket, carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee from the diner where his mother once worked. He sat across from Emily, placed 1 cup beside her water, then drank from the other before it cooled. Emily smiled because the gesture held more meaning than explanation. "You finally drink it now," she said. Dominic looked toward the rain and answered that memory had once felt safest when preserved exactly as it was. "Then someone taught me that honoring the past is not the same as refusing the future," he added. He explained that his mother poured coffee at 2:13 every Friday because finishing her shift meant surviving another week with enough hope to begin again. After her death, he ordered the same cup and left it untouched, believing grief required repetition to remain loyal. Adrian knew the ritual and weaponized its meaning, but the betrayal forced Dominic to understand that memories did not weaken when they changed shape. Drinking the coffee now meant accepting that gratitude could include joy, not only discipline. Emily listened without interrupting, aware that the answer mattered because he chose to share it, not because she had earned access. From her bag, Emily removed a framed watercolor completed during the investigation. It showed Mercer Street at dawn, scaffolding rising along the brick walls while residents watched from open windows, neither displaced nor romanticized. Near the bottom, she had painted 2 figures carrying boxes into the studio beside Mrs. Alvarez's store. Dominic studied the image until emotion softened his careful composure. "You included everyone," he said. Emily shook her head gently. "Not everyone, but the people the original plan tried not to see." Dominic placed a handcrafted leather bookmark beside the painting, embossed with a coffee cup, and the numbers 213. On the reverse appeared a sentence Emily read twice. "Thank you for teaching me that protection without trust is only another kind of control." He did not declare love or turn the moment into something larger than it could honestly hold. He simply asked whether she wanted to share table 7 the following Friday, not because silence needed company, but because their lives had begun making room for each other. Emily answered that she would come only if he allowed the coffee to stay warm enough to drink. Outside, dawn appeared above Chicago, touching rooftops, train tracks, and the repaired windows of Mercer Street several blocks away. The city remained imperfect, yet one building now belonged to those who lived inside it. Emily understood that justice had not arrived as rescue. It had been built through records, difficult choices, accountability, and people refusing to become invisible. Dominic reached across the table, not to claim her hand, but to leave his open beside hers. She closed the distance when she was ready, and together, they watched morning arrive over 2 cups that were finally empty.